The gravel crunched beneath her boots as Alexandra Quinn stood before the gates of the estate she had once called home. 10 years had passed, but nothing about those iron bars had softened. If anything, the ivy that twisted through their blackened frame seemed to mock her, whispering that she had been locked out long ago. The house rose in the distance, its windows glowing against the November night. From afar, it could have been mistaken for warmth. Inside, she knew, was only the coldness of a dynasty that had consumed everything: her youth, her identity, and nearly her will to survive. She adjusted her coat collar against the biting New York wind and let herself breathe, just once. 10 years of silence, 10 years of watching from the shadows, 10 years of building herself into something her father and siblings would never recognize until it was too late. Tonight, the mask came off. Inside, laughter spilled across the manicured lawn, muffled by walls of stone and glass. She could hear the echoes of clinking glasses, the rise and fall of voices she once knew like the back of her hand. Brandon, her older brother, probably holding court, spinning another exaggerated tale about his latest investment. Savannah, her younger sister, no doubt posing in front of someone's camera, practicing the art of being adored. And her father, always her father, looming like a king in exile, clutching the table as if it were his throne. Alexandra stepped forward, each footfall deliberate. Martha had told her the details. The whole family gathered for Thanksgiving, the estate buzzing with false cheer, her name never once mentioned. They thought she was gone, erased, written out of their legacy like a smudge in the family portrait. But Alexandra Quinn was no ghost. She had not spent the last decade clawing her way out of the ashes to be forgotten. She had built an empire in silence, a fortress of influence hidden in the steel towers of Austin and beyond. She had watched them rot from within, poisoning themselves with arrogance, while she sharpened every blade of her revenge. Now, with the weight of her grandfather's vision in her pocket and her mother's memory burning in her chest, she had returned to reclaim what was hers and to take what was never theirs to begin with. She pushed open the gates. The sound echoed like a verdict. Christmas Eve, 10 years ago. The estate glowed then too, though back then Alexandra still believed light meant warmth. She remembered the snow piled high on the stone steps, the frost glittering like diamonds across the trees. She had driven all the way from Columbia just to be there, nerves fluttering in her chest, hoping the holiday might soften her father's mood. She had been wrong. Inside, the dining room gleamed with silver and crystal. Her mother sat at the far end of the table, her beauty dimmed but still luminous, trying to smile through the tension. Martha moved quietly around the room, refilling glasses, laying down fresh dishes with the tenderness of someone who loved the family more than they deserved. And then there was him, her father. His presence consumed the table before he even spoke. He carved into the roast as though it were an enemy, each motion sharp, deliberate. Brandon sat at his right, smirking into his glass of wine. Savannah at his left, already scrolling through her phone even then, hungry for attention beyond these walls. Alexandra remembered sitting across from them, trying to ignore the weight in her stomach. She had just declared her major in computer science. She had plans, dreams, of working in tech, maybe even starting her own company one day. That night, she wanted to tell them, to share her vision, to prove she wasn't just the quiet middle child lost in the shuffle. But when she spoke, silence fell. Her father set down his knife. He didn't even look at her. "So, you've decided to waste your education," he said flatly. Brandon chuckled. Savannah didn't look up from her phone. Alexandra's chest tightened. "It's not a waste. This is the future. Everything is moving digital. AI, cybersecurity. Her father slammed his hand on the table, rattling the glasses. The future is Quinn Enterprises, a company built by men who understood strength, not computers. Her mother flinched but said nothing. Alexandra turned to her, searching for support, but her mother's eyes lowered to her plate. It was the silence that cut deeper than her father's words. Brandon leaned forward, voice dripping with condescension. Face it, Lexi. You've always been the odd one out. Dad's right. You don't belong in this family business. And Savannah, without looking up, added quietly, You don't really belong in this family, period. The words hit harder than she could have imagined. They laughed, as if her entire identity, her worth, were nothing more than a punchline. She remembered rising from the table, the room spinning, the smell of cinnamon and roast meats suddenly suffocating. Her father's voice followed her as she walked out. Don't come back until you have something worth showing us. The door closed behind her, the snow swirling in the night. She hadn't taken a coat. She had sat in her car, trembling, breath fogging the glass, alone, cast out. That was the night Alexandra Quinn stopped being their daughter, and the night she began becoming something far greater. The first year after the Quinn betrayal was nothing short of hell. Alexandra had left with nothing but a beat-up car, a duffel bag, and a heart caged in fury. Her father thought she would crawl back within months, broken, begging for scraps. He underestimated her. Austin was supposed to be temporary, a stopover, a chance to find work before figuring out the next step. Instead, the city became her crucible. She crashed on the couch of a friend from Colombia, sleeping with her laptop balanced on her knees, writing code until her eyes burned. Days blurred into nights, nights into weeks. She juggled unpaid internships, odd jobs, and long hours in coffee shops where she lived off stale bagels and black coffee. There were nights she considered giving up, nights when the silence in her tiny studio apartment pressed in so hard it felt like drowning. She would hear her father's words echoing, "You don't belong in this family." Brandon's smirk, Savannah's dismissive tone. Those echoes might have crushed her, but instead, they became fuel. She didn't just want to prove them wrong. She wanted to build something so powerful that by the time they realized she existed, it would already be too late. And so, she threw herself into the fire. At 24, Alexandra launched her first startup, an app that failed so spectacularly she almost lost everything. But failure taught her faster than success ever could. She learned how investors spoke, how markets shifted, how people lied with smiles. Every rejection hardened her resolve. Every slammed door became another brick in the fortress she was building inside her mind. By 26, she had caught the attention of a small but hungry venture capital firm. They didn't care about her last name. They cared about results. And results she delivered. Her second company, focused on cybersecurity solutions, took off during a time when corporations were desperate to protect themselves from data leaks. Alexandra had found her battlefield, and she was ruthless. Success did not come gently. She worked 16-hour days, lived out of conference rooms, and slept on office couches. People whispered that she was cold, calculating, impossible to please. They weren't wrong. She couldn't afford to be anything else. Compassion had been burned out of her the night she was exiled from her father's table. By 28, her name began surfacing in business magazines, though she always stayed in the background, letting her CEOs take the spotlight. She didn't want recognition. Not yet. She wanted anonymity. Power without the burden of fame. A shadow empire that stretched its roots into industries her family didn't even understand. The irony wasn't lost on her. while Quinn Enterprises was bleeding money in outdated ventures, real estate collapses, vanity investments, fragile supply chains. Her companies were thriving in the digital world. They were stuck in the past. She was building the future. Her empire grew quietly, but one ally saw everything: Martha, the old housekeeper who had raised her more than her own mother ever did. Martha fed her information in carefully coded emails, disguised as casual notes about life on the estate. Through Martha, Alexandra learned about Brandon's failing investments, Savannah's scandals, and her father's crumbling health. Every piece of information was a weapon, and Alexandra stored them all, waiting. By 32, Alexandra Quinn wasn't just wealthy. She was untouchable. Networks of shell companies, layers of legal firewalls, and a legion of loyal employees who would follow her into the fire. She had become what her father once claimed she could never be, the strongest Quinn of them all. And yet, she told no one. Not yet. Because Alexandra's rise wasn't about proving herself anymore. It was about revenge. And revenge requires patience. For nearly a decade, Alexandra had waited in silence, weaving her empire from the shadows. Patience had been her greatest weapon, and now it was time to unsheath it. The Quinns still had no idea. To them, Alexandra was a ghost. If she was mentioned at all, it was with a sneer, like a family embarrassment best forgotten. But while they drank champagne at charity galas and posed for magazines, Alexandra was orchestrating their downfall with surgical precision. Her first strike was deceptively small. She didn't go after the heart of Quinn Enterprises. Not yet. No, she targeted its veins. Brandon, the so-called heir, had built his identity on risky investments and ego-driven ventures, private jets, failed tech startups, luxury hotels bleeding money. Alexandra, through her network of shell corporations, began quietly buying up his debts. Bank after bank, firm after firm, Brandon thought he was refinancing, stabilizing. In reality, he was signing his soul away, one signature at a time. When the trap was set, she triggered the collapse. A crucial deal Brandon had been counting on fell apart overnight thanks to a leak Alexandra herself had engineered. Suddenly, creditors came knocking, and the Quinn Golden Boy was left scrambling. But she wasn't finished. Her second move was more personal. Savannah, the sister who once smirked across the dinner table as Alexandra was cast out, was living a glamorous life as a philanthropist and socialite. But Martha's whispers had revealed the truth. Savannah was drowning in scandal, affairs, backroom deals, and a charity foundation riddled with fraud. Alexandra leaked just enough evidence to the right journalist. Not all of it. Not enough to destroy Savannah completely. Just enough to humiliate her. To drag her perfect image through the mud. Watching Savannah S. smile crack on the evening news was like sipping vintage champagne after years of thirst. Still, Alexandra's strikes were precise, controlled. She wasn't ready to expose herself. Not yet. The true masterpiece came with the third move. Quinn Enterprises itself. Her father, Richard Quinn, had built the empire on old-world industries, shipping, oil, real estate, but he had failed to adapt to the digital age. His advisors kept telling him to diversify into tech, but his arrogance blinded him. He thought he was untouchable. That arrogance was Alexandra's opening. Through an acquisition front, she bought out a mid-tier logistics firm that Quinn Enterprises relied on heavily for distribution. At first, it seemed like nothing, just another company changing hands. But within 6 months, Quinn Enterprises found itself strangled by unexpected delays, supply shortages, and contractual disputes. Every complaint, every fine, every angry partner, they all traced back to her chessboard. Her family was bleeding money, credibility, and reputation, and still, they had no idea who was behind it. Late at night, sitting in her glass-walled office, overlooking the Austin skyline, Alexandra allowed herself a rare smile. For the first time since her exile, she felt the power shifting. The Quinn dynasty wasn't eternal. It wasn't untouchable. It was fragile, and she was the storm breaking its foundations. And yet, this was only the beginning. Her father had once told her she was too weak to survive in his world. Now, Alexandra was about to show him just how wrong he had been. The Quinn Empire had always projected an image of strength. Marble boardrooms, glossy magazines calling them America's untouchable dynasty, handshakes with senators and billionaires. But behind the cameras, Alexandra's first strikes had left cracks spiderwebbing through the foundation, and the cracks were widening. Brandon Quinn was unraveling. His lavish lifestyle had been financed by loans he no longer controlled. When the calls from creditors began flooding in, his arrogance turned to rage. He smashed glasses, screamed at assistants, threatened lawyers. But beneath the tantrums was fear. The kind of fear that comes when the golden boy realizes the world sees him as nothing but a hollow fraud. At the same time, Savannah's downfall was being televised. Her picture-perfect Instagram facade. Champagne galas, charity luncheons, designer gowns, now looked grotesque next to headlines of fraud and scandal. Donations to her foundation dried up overnight. Former friends stopped answering her calls. The paparazzi hounded her relentlessly. And for the first time in her adult life, Savannah Quinn knew humiliation. But the chaos inside the family went deeper than public embarrassment. In the boardroom of Quinn Enterprises, the empire itself was under siege. Delays in distribution contracts were costing millions. Lawsuits piled up like storm clouds. Business partners whispered of betrayal. Investors threatened to pull out. Richard Quinn, the patriarch, sat at the head of the long mahogany table. His jaw tight, his eyes blazing. He had spent decades building this empire, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. To see it slipping through his fingers was intolerable. He accused Brandon of being careless. Brandon snapped back, blaming the company's outdated strategies and his father's refusal to adapt. Savannah tried to defend herself, but Richard silenced her with a glare that could cut steel. For the first time in years, the family dinners were no longer silent cold wars. They were battlegrounds. Voices rose, tempers flared, and the patriarch, once revered as untouchable, began to look weak. Whispers began among the board members. Loyal executives who had served Richard for decades started questioning his judgment. Could it be time for a new leader? Was the Quinn Empire nearing its twilight? Through it all, Alexandra watched from afar. Her office had become a war room. Screens tracking stock fluctuations, emails, media leaks, and every ripple of chaos she had created. Martha, her loyal ally, updated her daily, and every update was sweeter than the last. She didn't just want the Quinns broke. She wanted them fractured, paranoid, doubting each other until the family bond, the one thing they had weaponized against her, turned into their undoing. And it was working. Richard Quinn's empire was no longer untouchable. His children no longer worshipped him. His board no longer trusted him. For the first time in his life, Richard Quinn was standing on a cliff's edge, and Alexandra was the storm pushing him closer to the fall. The Quinn estate had always been a fortress. Gates tall enough to keep the city out, walls thick enough to keep their secrets in. But now, inside those same walls, suspicion was devouring them from the inside. Brandon paced the study like a caged predator, his phone buzzing with lawyers, begging for answers he couldn't provide. "This isn't random," he spat, slamming the screen down on the desk. "Someone is targeting us. Someone who knows exactly where to strike." Savannah sat curled on the leather armchair, sunglasses hiding swollen eyes. She had been cornered at a charity gala just 2 nights before. Cameras flashing, reporters hurling questions about fraud, betrayal, and stolen funds. "It's the media," she whispered, voice cracking. "They're vultures. Someone fed them blood." At the head of the room, Richard Quinn said nothing. He simply stared at the fire, his jaw working, his knuckles white against the armrest. Age had never shown on him before, but tonight the lines on his face seemed deeper, carved by the weight of something he couldn't control. Finally he spoke. His voice was low, steady, almost too calm. "This isn't coincidence. Our enemies have always wanted us broken. But this..." He paused, eyes flickering toward his children. "This feels personal." The silence after his words was suffocating. Board meetings grew no better. Rumors swirled like smoke. Had a rival conglomerate infiltrated them? Was it a disgruntled former executive? Or was it one of their own, selling them out piece by piece? Every ally became a suspect. Every phone call carried doubt. The Quinn Empire, once bound by loyalty and intimidation, was splintering into paranoia, and Alexandra, she was the ghost they could never see, yet always felt. She moved like smoke through the cracks. A leaked memo here, a conveniently timed tip to a journalist there, a whisper fed to an investor at the exact right moment. She didn't need to destroy them in one blow. She let them destroy themselves, one paranoid accusation at a time. At night, Richard found himself awake at his desk, staring at old photographs. Alexandra's face, once in every family portrait, had been erased. Her existence, scrubbed from the house like an inconvenience. He told himself she was gone, forgotten, irrelevant. But lately, her absence felt heavier than her presence ever had. One evening, he confided in his most trusted aide, an old associate named Carmichael. "What if..." Richard's voice faltered, almost unheard above the crackling fire. "What if it's her?" Carmichael froze, lips tightening. "Sir?" "Alexandra has been gone for a decade." Richard's eyes narrowed. The firelight flickered in them like burning coals. "Sometimes the shadows you ignore grow teeth." He didn't say her name again, but the suspicion had been planted. For the first time in years, the ghost of Alexandra Quinn had stepped back into her father's mind, and she smiled when she heard, because Alexandra knew the most dangerous weapon wasn't power or money, it was doubt. The Quinn mansion was quieter these days, not with peace, but with fear. Once, its halls echoed with laughter at opulent dinners, glasses clinking with expensive champagne. Now the silence was broken only by whispers, and the occasional slam of a door. Savannah couldn't stop pacing. Every news headline was sharper than the last. Quinn stocks plummet again. Another lawsuit filed against Quinn Enterprises. Anonymous source leaks damning audio. But it was Brandon who cracked first. One evening, after a disastrous board meeting, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. He frowned, swiping it open. There was no greeting, just a single line. "Still proud of the empire you built on lies." Attached was a photo. Their family, 10 years ago, at a garden party. Brandon's arm was around his sister. Alexandra's smile was small, almost shy, but unmistakable. The blood drained from his face. He didn't tell Savannah. He didn't tell his father. Instead, he sat in the dark, staring at the image until his hands shook. Because in his gut, he knew. The ghost had a name. A few days later, Richard Quinn attended what should have been a routine investor gathering. Except the air was different. Investors pressed him with questions sharper than any knife. His reassurances sounded hollow. Then, as he adjusted his tie and prepared to leave, a staffer rushed over, pale-faced. "Sir, this came for you." It was an envelope. Heavy, cream paper, the kind used for personal letters. He slid it open with a trembling hand. Inside was a single sentence, written in elegant script. Fathers should never forget their daughters. Richard's heart stuttered. His fingers tightened until the paper nearly tore. For a moment, he saw her, standing in the corner of the ballroom. Not the shy girl he had cast out, but a woman now, poised, sharp-eyed, wearing a shadow of a smile. He blinked. She was gone. Or had she ever been there at all? That night, he called Brandon and Savannah into the study. The fire roared, but the air was ice. "It's her," Richard said, his voice rough. Savannah frowned. "Her who?" Richard's jaw tightened. "Your sister." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Brandon finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. I think she's been in touch. With me." Savannah's hands flew to her mouth. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "She was supposed to be gone," she whispered. "We erased her. We buried her." "No," Richard growled, slamming his fist against the desk. His eyes were fire now, blazing with a mix of rage and fear. "She buried us." And across town, Alexandra sat in a modest apartment, watching news clips on an old television. The Quinn Empire was burning, and their patriarch was finally saying her name again. She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "Now you remember me." The Quinn estate was a fortress no more. Reporters camped at the gates, creditors circled like vultures, and the once gilded mansion now looked more like a tomb. Inside, Richard Quinn sat in his study, shoulders hunched. He had aged 10 years in mere months. Brandon poured himself another drink, hand shaking. Savannah sat near the fire, clutching a rosary she had never used before. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps, steady, certain. Richard froze. Savannah whispered, "Don't answer it." But the door swung open anyway. The butler, pale and nervous, stepped aside. And there she was, Alexandra Quinn, no longer the timid girl they had cast aside. She stood tall, clad in simple black, her eyes steady, unflinching. Behind her, the night wind rustled, as if carrying with it every ghost of her past. "Hello, father," she said softly. Richard's breath caught. Brandon rose, mouth open, but no words came. Savannah's eyes filled with tears. "You," Richard spat, forcing strength back into his voice. "You dare show your face here?" Alexandra tilted her head. "I didn't just show it. I made sure the whole world remembered it." Brandon finally found his voice. "Why, Alex? Why destroy us like this?" Her gaze cut through him. "Destroy you? No. I showed the truth. You destroyed yourselves years ago when you decided I was disposable." Richard's fist slammed the desk. "You were weak. You didn't belong in this family. Everything I did was to protect our name." "Protect?" Her voice sharpened, trembling with controlled fury. "You silenced me, cast me out, pretended I never existed. Do you know what it's like to walk past a mirror and wonder if you was even real, because your own family erased you?" Savannah sobbed. "Alexandra, please. We were young. We didn't what?" Alexandra snapped, turning to her sister. "Didn't fight for me. Didn't care when I was broken? Don't pretend you were powerless. You chose silence. Silence is complicity." The room fell heavy. Fire crackled. Rain tapped against the windows. Finally, Richard rose to his feet. His voice was low, dangerous. "So this is your revenge? To ruin us? To drag our name through filth?" "No, father," Alexandra said. stepping closer until they were face to face. My revenge was making sure the world finally saw you for what you are. And now, she leaned in, her voice almost a whisper. You'll live with it. Richard's mask cracked. For the first time, Alexandra saw fear in his eyes. She turned, her heels clicking against the marble. At the doorway, she paused. You once told me I'd never survive without the Quinn name. Look at me now. Look at you. And with that, she left, vanishing into the night, free at last. The next morning, newspapers screamed headlines. Quinn dynasty collapses. Federal investigations launched. Whistleblower exposes family secrets. The empire was ash. Richard's name, once untouchable, was now a curse. And Alexandra. She walked through the city streets, the rain washing over her. For the first time in years, she felt light. Not because the Quinns were destroyed, but because she was no longer their shadow. Her revenge was complete, and her life was finally her own.